There's nothing quite like a really good sleep in the outdoors. But on the other hand, there's nothing quite like spending all night awake in a tent. In this video, I wanted to share some of the things that I've learned over the last couple of years that will help me sleep in the outdoors better. In fact, a lot of this stuff will help you sleep at home better as well. I personally haven't been sleeping that great lately. These are just some things that I'm testing out to make my life easier. I hope it'll help you. Let's get into it. So it's about 7 p.m, we've got a couple more hours of daylight. The plan is to just climb up a couple of 100 meters here to a nice flat meadow area, and that's where I'm going to put up my tent and hopefully get a good night's sleep. Now the view here is just continually getting better and better every couple of 100 meters. It's got Canadian vibes, this range. I really love it. How good's this place? I've never seen a more ideal place to camp in my life. This is so beautiful. Welcome to Pratt's the Caddy. I'm going to set my tent up and then we'll get into the content. Once I just calm down from experiencing this amazing view. I guess the first thing I should say is that obviously every campsite is not going to be this amazing. Most of the time when you put up a campsite, it's a little bit wonky and the ground's not so flat. And you know, this might seem obvious, but you don't want to sleep with your head going downhill. I've actually seen people do that. It's crazy. I don't know why you would do that. I think part of the reason we go outside is to get rejuvenated, to relax and have a good rest. And if you're coming out into the mountains and not sleeping well, then we're just not getting the most out of our experience. So one thing that I absolutely always bring with me when I'm in the outdoors is a pair of earplugs. It doesn't matter whether you're in a tent, even worse if you're staying in a refuge or a hostel in the mountains, there's going to be people around you probably snoring. There might be a lot of wind rushing up against your tent. If you minimize the distractions by wearing earplugs, you're much more likely to get a good night's sleep. Now there's the obvious argument against that, like you might want to be able to hear things around you, but I'll let you make that decision on your own depending on where you're at. If there's a bear around, you probably want to hear it. Along the same lines, you might also like to bring an eye mask. Sometimes if it's a full moon, it's not actually that dark in the outdoors. A full moon is really, really bright, and that can make getting to sleep pretty tough. Also, if you're staying in a refuge, people will get up at all hours in the morning trying to get an alpine start. People will turn the light on at 3 a.m. I don't actually bring an eye mask when I come out into the wilderness. I like to just wear a beanie, and that usually filters out enough light to keep it dark enough for me to sleep properly. This next tip is a little bit different, and it's probably going to rustle some feathers, but something I've been doing recently is taping my mouth. The reason why is because you're meant to breathe through your nose. I always try and focus on nasal breathing when I'm hiking. Even when I'm sitting at home throughout the day, I'm really focusing on just using my nose. You know, I think when people snore, they generally snore through their mouth, not through their nose. Like if you're breathing really well in and out through your nose, there's no reason for you to snore. Generally, people that have sleep apnea will be mouth breathers, and having the mouth hanging open leads the tongue to slide down and block the throat, and they'll stop breathing for 10 seconds during the night. Now I know it sounds like a bit of an extreme measure, but it's really not that bad. The first night that I did this, I taped my whole mouth across horizontally like this. And to be perfectly honest, I woke up a couple of times during the night. But after that first night, I think I subconsciously kind of got used to having the tape on my mouth. Second night I woke up once, and the third night I didn't wake up at all. I had a really nice deep sleep. Now, I don't think it's really necessary to tape the whole mouth for me, because I usually breathe through my nose. Just enough, like this small piece is plenty for me. And this is what James Nestor, the author of the book Breathe, recommends to do, just a really small piece of tape over both lips. The type of tape that I'm using, this one's leucopore, so it's like a paper kind of style tape, and it's not very adhesive. It's not going to rip any hairs out. The other thing I found out is if you're getting up in the middle of the night to pee a lot, that could be due to breathing through your mouth as well. It's called nocturia, I think. I forget where I read it, but apparently there's a higher rate of nocturia in people that breathe through their mouth during the night rather than people that breathe through their nose. So if you're always getting up to pee, maybe try breathing in through your nose when you're sleeping. I think there's very few downsides of taping the mouth. Once you get over the initial discomfort, it's really not a problem, and you sleep a lot better, and most importantly, you breathe through your nose. Now, another good reason to breathe through your nose when you're in the mountains is that there's cold, dry air up here, and if you breathe in through your mouth, through your trachea, you'll get a really dry larynx. So when you're breathing in nasally, you've got turbinates and hairs and mucus sacs. It's designed to moisten the air, filter it, and prepare the air to go into your lungs. There's nothing like that in the mouth. So especially in the mountains, you want to breathe through your nose. Another thing I like to do is to minimize the amount of direct light I'm getting into my eyes after sunset. So I try not to look at my phone. I try and keep my head torch on the red setting. And that means I'm kind of tapping into my circadian rhythm. And the reason why I do this is because when you have really bright light that's punching into the retina, it sends the signal to the brain that it's still daylight. Your brain doesn't know the difference between artificial light and the light from the sun. So if we can keep really bright light away from our eyes after dark, it means our brain's going to be tapping into our circadian rhythm, slowing us down naturally towards the end of the day and preparing us for sleep. I find bright white light really harsh after dark, so I like to have either red light or orange light when I'm at home after dark to try and just bring the mood down and prepare me to have a good night's sleep. The head torch that I use from Nightcore, this one has a red function, and it's a really beautiful little torch, very lightweight. This is the one that I used on the HRP last year. Now that information about the light is just kind of coming off the top of my head, but if you want to dive into that a little bit more, I would recommend checking out Andrew Huberman's podcast. This guy's a neuroscientist. He's so incredibly intelligent. He's so good with sharing his information. Now, if you're shopping for new sleeping gear, keep in mind the way that you sleep. Like, have a think about the way that you sleep at home. Do you sleep on your side? Do you sleep on your back? Do you sleep on your stomach? Keep those things in mind when you're purchasing your equipment, because buying a really thin mat, if you sleep on your side, is probably not going to be the best. I sleep on my side and I like something a little bit wider, and I also like something a little bit lower to the ground. But you know, there's a lot to be said by just picking a really good campsite. Like if you find somewhere that's got nice soft grass, you might not necessarily need a really big thick pad. So if you want to cut down the weight a little bit, sleep nice and low to the ground and have a little bit more of a connection to the ground as you're sleeping. Just out of interest, recently I bought the Thermarest Neo, what's it called? Neo Air Uberlight, I think it's called. And it was, for me, it was terrible. So you're, you know, this far off the ground and it's very narrow. I couldn't really roll around. I would really rethink getting an inflatable mattress that's torso length. Like if you're gonna get inflatable, my advice would probably just to get a long one, because the disparity between your legs and your torso when you're on a mat that is that thick, I find it quite uncomfortable, but each their own. You can go and experiment and find out for yourself. So yeah, I would recommend trying out a minimal approach to padding as long as it's summer. You know, go and test out one night of just sleeping on a Z-Lite, like a foldable mat, or a 1/8 inch closed cell foam pad. I think it's cool to kind of experiment with these things, A, to see how light you can go, and B, to see how comfortable you can be in nature without all the luxurious accessories, if you know what I mean. No shade to anyone who wants to be comfortable. If you want to go full luxury, go for it, be my guest. Before we get into the next tip, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video. This video is quite literally powered by Jackery. I recently got a hold of the Explorer 500 battery, which is powering all my cameras, laptops. It stays in my van. It's absolutely brilliant, and it can be charged by the solar panel. It can also be charged directly from my van. It's got enough power to charge my laptop. I can charge a blender. Of course, it's charging all my cameras and all the electronics in my van. I didn't expect this when I got it, but it actually has 3 different power charging cables. One that you plug in to get solar, one that you can charge directly from your regular 240 power source, and the other one that I can plug in from my alternator in my car. So I literally just get the cigarette lighter, plug it straight into the Jackery, and while I'm driving around in my car, the Jackery is charging. And it means that I can keep this thing topped up as I'm driving around between my hikes. I can keep all my stuff charged, and I'm not gonna get halfway out here into a video with flat batteries. So if you're driving around with not enough power and you need to level up, check out Jackery. I'll leave a link in the description. Now, what about quilts or bags? Well, I'm a fan of both. I have both. I've always used sleeping bags up until like a couple of years ago when I switched to a poncho quilt. So this kind of ridiculous looking contraption is a sleeper quilt. I found it really nice to have that extra layer. I went without a down jacket one year and just used the poncho quilt, so I got a bit of weight savings there. But I found the quilt really nice to sleep in. I think something about the fact that it wraps around the mattress and kind of keeps you in a cocoon. I found that easier to get to sleep and have a good night's sleep. You know, one thing with a sleeping bag is it's quite tight around your legs, and I was always really focused on turning myself inside the sleeping bag rather than just kind of rolling over with the sleeping bag, if you know what I mean. And that can actually be quite difficult, and you can kind of get yourself tied up in knots. Whereas a quilt, I feel like it stays where it is, which I find much more comfortable. Now, obviously when it comes to really cold conditions, I'm still going to be using a sleeping bag because it's just way better at keeping the heat in. Now, one thing I had been getting into a bit more recently is using a pillow. I was always a guy that would, you know, get a down jacket and all my extra clothes and stuff them in a spare t-shirt and use that as a pillow. And yeah, it does suffice, but it's not quite as reliable as having a pillow. Like when you're sleeping on your clothes, they can disperse throughout the night and you're kind of always waking up trying to gather all the clothing together to be comfortable with your head. I'm just starting to use a pillow now. This one that I'm using is from Cedar Summit. It's the Eros Pillow Ultralight Regular is the one I have. I think for something that is this light and this small to pack down, it's kind of a no-brainer for comfort. So I would definitely recommend getting a hold of one of these. But you can buy all the luxury sleeping equipment in the world. It doesn't necessarily guarantee you a good night's sleep. I think the most important thing is that you just allow yourself a little bit of time to wind down before you sleep. Make yourself a hot cup of tea, check out the views, lay down and just take a couple of big deep breaths. I actually have a little breathing routine that I like to do to try and calm me down before I go to sleep. I just breathe in through my nose for 4 seconds and then out through my nose for 8 seconds. So it's double the length of time on the exhale, and I find that just really calming, and it really kind of brings me down, brings my heart rate down, and just gets me ready for a good night's sleep. Speaking of which, I'm just about ready for a good night's sleep. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you've got extra tips, things that pop up, put them in the comments because I'm sure people will want to hear them, and I would love to hear them as well. I certainly didn't cover everything to do with sleep in this video, just touching on a couple of little topics for you to dive into if you want to learn a little bit more. All of the references to things that I've learned from the science and, you know, the gear I talked about, I'll put links in the description if you want to check those out. Thanks for watching. That's all for this one. I'll see you on the summit.